Welcome, everyone. It's such an honor to serve as the facilitator and moderator for our discussion this afternoon. I'm really honored and I'm truly excited, and I'm keen to hear what our speaker, Mr. Mustafa Erdogan, and our panelists are going to say in a short while. I just want to alert you that this session is being recorded. So please feel free to to familiarize yourself with the privacy policy. It is available on top of your screen, which says recording has started. So I just want to alert you to that. Yes, so I have welcomed you, and I see people will be joining the room as we progress. So we will just we will just proceed today as we look at the relationship between social justice and experiential learning and empowering and uplifting communities. I think the topic really it's extremely self-explanatory in terms of what we're trying to unpack today, and we're truly honored to have Mustafa as our speaker, who's going to start us off as he gives this talk. You would have seen in the poster, if you've had an opportunity to read what the description says, basically really looking at the fact that community empowerment and upliftment are important elements in the attainment of social justice in South Africa and the world. And through empowering and uplifting communities, people are equipped with the experience, the knowledge, and the skills that they need to enrich their lives and the lives of those around them, and also to attain opportunities for social and economic growth through this process. So the Café seeks to unpack experiential learning and its relationship with social justice in empowering and uplifting communities. Now, before we proceed, I just want to bring to light some rules of engagement. We kindly request that you keep your video off and your mic muted unless you are, of course, speaking. In this case, my video is on, Mustafa's video is on because he's about to present. And then just to ensure that we have a smooth process, please keep your video off and your mic muted. You are more than welcome to post any comments and questions on the chat whilst our speakers are speaking. You do not need to wait for the discussion. So we will be monitoring the comment section. And then when it is the opportunity for a discussion, we will go back to those comments and ask our speakers to address any of the points that have been made. So please, throughout the conversation, please feel free to post any comments and questions. Of course, during the conversation, during the discussion part of today, you will just indicate by raising your virtual hand, and then I will recognize you during the discussion. Of course, there's certain time that is allocated, so I'm hoping that we will be able to stick to the allocated time to ensure that we have as much engagement as possible. And last but definitely not least, just to urge you to be as respectful, just to be respectful in the space. It is we're coming together in this virtual room, and so we need to just respect each other's views, respect each other's opportunities when we have to speak, and just enjoy and ensure that we are a space that promotes respect. Then, in terms of the breakdown of the program, I'm going to hand over to Mustafa shortly, who is going to give us our keynote address. This will be followed by a panel discussion. Our first panelist, Ms. Ruth Andrews, will have an opportunity to contribute. Ms. Ruth Andrews will then be followed by Mr. David Gabwa, who will make their contributions. They will each have 10 minutes to make contributions. Mustafa will be allocated 20 minutes to make his contribution. We will then have a discussion that has been set up for 40 minutes, after which I'm going to ask Prof. Tulima Donsela to just give us a vote of thanks. So that's just going to be the process for this afternoon. So without further ado, I'm really honored to introduce you to our keynote speaker for this afternoon, Mr. Mustafa Erdogan, who is the founder of Experiential Training Center in Turkey. So just he has an extensive bio, and so I will just pick out just one or two things for your interest. So he is a specialist in non-formal formal education, a trainer, youth worker, and founder, as I said, of DEM Experiential Center. Experiential Training Center in Turkey, and he has more than 15 years of experience in the field of civil society. He holds a bachelor's degree in comparative literature and a master's degree in management of non-governmental organization and social projects. Like I said, he has an extensive bio and we could go on, but in the interest of time, Mustafa, I'm going to hand over to you as you do our keynote address. Thank you very much.
Okay, finally, thank you very much for opening the Café. And thank you very much for really introducing all these structures. We feel that we are in safe hands. So I would like to welcome you all. Now I see how many participants we have, like I think more than 15, even 16, 18. So welcome all. I would like to greet you from Istanbul. Warm greetings. So as Fanele introduced kindly, I'm a civil society professional, also a non-formal educator. And yeah, this is my second time that I'm joining your circle. Last year, I had the privilege to join the Experiential Education Conference of Stellenbosch University. That was an amazing experience. And that's why I was very excited again to be part of your circle again. Yes, unpacking experiential learning and unpacking the relation with social justice. Of course, this is a tough thing, quite deep, but in a short time, so I will try to share some cornerstones, especially the work we are doing here in the context of experiential learning and youth works. So Emil is going to help me, thanks to him, to share my presentation with you. So Emil, could you please open my slides. Yes, so this is Experiential Training Center. The acronym is DEM, D-E-M, is a short form of Experiential Training Center in Turkish. So we founded in 2009 as a youth work organization. But in the following years, of course, we started working in different fields of education, but still youth work is one of the main focus of our NGO. And you can just see the web page down. So there is also an English web page. You can have more information there. So today I would like to talk about experiential learning and social transformation of and by youngsters, how we are doing in our NGO. Okay, so today, experiential learning in a nutshell. So we're going to just touch the cornerstones, the youth work organizations in our NGO and how we are using experiential learning for social transformation in youth work. So this is what I'm going to share. Okay, so let's talk about experiential learning in a nutshell. A previous one, Emil. Yeah, the first picture, please. So dear colleagues, could you please share in the chat, what do you see in this picture? What do you see in this photo? Okay, let's make it a bit participative. Great, okay. So Chris, so a child learning to ride a bike by doing, learning through doing, very nice. But if I want you to focus a bit on child's face, what do you see? A child testing his boundaries and being supported, great. So there is a testing of the boundaries, so it's the challenging, but also receiving support. Yeah, there is an structure, satisfaction, joy with some apprehension, excitement, determination. Okay, determination, excitement, determination. What kind of more emotions do you see there? Can you catch some more emotions here? Yeah, feel free to. Happy, yes. Happiness, excitement, but also, yeah, anxious, a bit afraid, right? So I love this photo. Well, thank you very much. Just, feel free to type. So I love this photo when I start talking about experiential learning because this reflects a lot. As you just wrote in the chat box, we see different emotions in the learning process. And most of the times, these emotions are also conflicting emotions, like different emotions, like happiness, excitement, and being afraid at the same time. Why I show this photo before starting talking about experiential learning? Because experiential learning puts emotions really in a very important center when we talk about learning. So learning is not only grasping an abstract information, just putting in our long-term memory, but it's very much related with emotions and our experiences and all these emotions that reflected by our experiences. But also I would like to draw your attention to this conflicting emotions, because so David Kolb, so the founder of experiential learning theory, so he says when we start learning, like fear and hope, these two emotions accompany our learning process together. So hope is for, you know, getting new knowledge, expertise, and fear is even be ashamed or failure, etc. So that's why when we talk about learning, when we talk about experiential learning, we should all be aware about that. This is not only a smooth process, you know, a linear process that we are one by one, step by step, getting some new knowledge and practicing it, but it's also a sophisticated process that we are dealing with our experiences and emotions. Actually, we are learning how to deal with these conflicting emotions and experiences. That's why experiential learning is very much related with conflict management as well. Okay, so yeah, Eon wrote, what does the child represent? What does the father represent? What does the bike represent? Yeah, it can represent many things, Eon, actually. What matters is what do they represent for you, you know? So that's more important. For me, yeah, father is there. I don't know if father or uncle, whatever, is really representing the educator, but having different roles. So, and of course, child is the learner. And bike for me is just a small step in the learning process, because here the child is not only learning how to bike. And that would be my second question, actually. Now, what do you see in this picture? Okay. So, okay, Chad seems more confident. Yeah, he's biking alone at this time. Realization he's doing it alone. Great. Determination. Okay, a yes and no question to you. Just type yes or no. Do you think that the learning process is over? The learning process of this child has been completed? Definitely no, because that's about what the bike represents. Actually, in experiential learning, we see learning is a lifelong process, an ongoing process, and all learning outcomes, all learning outputs, objectives, they are just milestones in our ongoing learning process. That's why we don't see learning as separate packages, you know, like lessons in the school. So I have a math lesson, I have an English lesson, or I have another sport lesson. But experiential learning sees all these different learning areas together in a holistic way. And of course, we are always like putting the new knowledge on the previous knowledge and experiences. So that's why this photo also represents a lot about the philosophy of experiential learning. Do you remember at what age did you learn how to bike? I was 6. Do you remember? Just please recall those memories, you know, like how did you learn how to bike? Actually, the barber, the hairdresser in my district, he taught me. He was my bike teacher. And yeah, Khan was 10. Yeah, okay, 12. So really early ages, right? And really the learning how to bike is a good and clear example of experiential learning. But we are not always in our life or in the structured programs, we're not always having learning spaces as we learn how to bike, right? Okay, let's pass to the next slide and let's see. Okay, so this is experiential learning cycle. So this is like the ABC of experiential learning, the base that we are building everything on. For our friends today, maybe for those who are just seeing this for the first time, just a small explanation. So we said experiential learning is a learning theory developed by actually predominant scholars of 20th century, but David Kolb, so he formalized all these works of previous scientists into a very understandable and clear framework. So the theory says us that actually learning is an ongoing process that we are following a 4 steps cycle. So the first step is concrete experience. So concrete experience part is right here, right now part. So this is the moment where we are experiencing the world. In our childhood story, let's say you just get on the bike, you try and you fall down, right? So this is a concrete experience. John Dewey, one of the main founders of experiential learning theory, says we are not always taking the experience to the reflection stage, not all experiences. For example, I can just drink, I can take a sip of water, but I don't reflect on this, you know. I don't say, okay, what kind of experience it was for me, because this is not a strong enough experience for me. That's why if the experience is strong enough, then we proceed the reflection side. And the reflection side, the second step is the step where we try to understand the experience, like put meaning on it. So in our childhood story, so we question, why did I fall down? I'm just looking at Fanale, for example. Oh, he's doing good. Why, he's doing good? So I'm trying to connect my observation and my reflection to understand my experiences. So the reflection side is very important. But after these reflections, we are arriving to the south side of the experiential learning cycle, which is abstract conceptualizing. We can also say simply the thinking side. So this is where we arrive to some conclusions, some new knowledge. This is the moment when we say, aha, now I understand. Or this is not only through our self-reflection, like after our reflection, we can also connect some already existing knowledge with this. For example, David comes to me and says, hey, Mustafa, do you know when you ride the bike slower, it is harder to balance. But if you're a bit faster, then it's easier to balance. So this is an abstract information, what I have, right? But when I connect this abstract information with my concrete experience through reflection, now this is a new knowledge and this is an internalized knowledge for me. Okay, what I'm going to do with this knowledge, so I will pass to the 4th stage, the active experimentation part. So I will I will test this new knowledge. And then I'll see, yeah, it's working. I'm faster and it's easy for me to balance. But this experience, this active experimentation is again providing me a concrete experience. Then I reflect again, I conceptualize again, and I experiment again. So that's why this is not only a cycle, but we can see this as a spiral. So it's a spiral going lifelong. Okay, this is an experiential learning in a nutshell. I don't want to make it longer. So our NGO, named Experiential Training Center, so our main mission is to promote, develop, and disseminate experiential learning in all areas of learning and education. But today I would like to give you some examples how we are putting this experiential learning in our youth works for social transformation. Okay, so we have 2 internal networks in our NGO. Demgah is the educators network. So there we are like more than 60 trainers, teachers, scholars, youth workers from formal and non-formal education field. Also, we have DEM Youth. It's an experiential education youth network. Now we are in 2 universities in Istanbul, and we have almost 40 active youngsters in this youth department. And how we are working with the youngsters there, actually, we are also cooperating with our educators from Demgah network. But this is not only one-way relation. It's not only our youngsters are learning from our youth workers, educators, but our educators, youth workers are learning from our youngsters as well. So this is like everyone in this circle are educator and educatee, as Paulo Freire states. Okay, so Demlenme is a Turkish name, is a training program for our youngsters. So every year when we have new students, so this is a kind of orientation program that we are applying. Demlenme actually is a word play that means like becoming one from them, if we say in Turkish, but also it means brewing, like brewing tea. you know. And tea is very important in Turkey, so it has a deep meaning in Turkish culture. Even you go to restaurants, you eat something, they bring tea for free for you. So tea has also a very metaphoric and cultural meaning in this context. That's why we just wanted to name it like demlenme. And how this program proceeds. So there are 4 steps as we are cooking the tea. So there are, as you know, 4 steps also when we cook tea. So the first step is warming. We should warm the water. And then boiling. So the water should boil. And then we put tea inside the pot. And then we brew. So we leave it a bit for a while to brew. And after tea is ready, then we make service. So that's why we are doing our training course around this storytelling concept, which is quite metaphoric as well. And the first step, the warming, includes, yeah, this is one picture from our training program. Yeah, as you can see, so people are like sitting in U or in a circle. So everyone is equal there, and we are all learning by playing games, etc. So there in the middle, you see all these papers. So we asked youngsters in this training program to build their training center in their mind. So, but also experience the teamwork, but also making need analysis of their peers, etc. Lots of things. So we are using the game methodology a lot in our training programs. Great. Okay, so I speed up a bit here. So I have like 5 minutes left. So the warming part is mainly get to know each other. So getting the expectations. The previous slide, please. Yeah. So introduction of experiential learning and learning games and learning by having fun. So it's really important to have fun in this first stage. So first we create this hospitable learning space, safe learning space, we say, in order to proceed going to the real stuff. Then the second is boiling. So there we go in some serious topics. So discussions, debates, we play simulation games on like intercultural learning, like democracy, like participation. You know, we talk about oppression, social transformation, and here we are trying to aim to increase the critical thinking of the people. And once we arrive this stage, then brewing part. So there we just let youngsters to make observations about their social problems in their environment, brainstorming about solutions and developing their micro projects. And the service part. But here is important. What we do is we match our youngsters with related NGOs. For example, if a group of youngsters, they wanted to work on gender issues, gender equality, then we are matching these youngsters with an NGO who is working in that field. That's why by this way, they will receive also supervising, and they go to the praxis stage where they just implement their micro projects. Okay, here you can see some examples on the up left. So some youngsters did a micro project about senior center. There you can see an animal shelter. They did some exercises, you know, like plays, lots of activities in a hospital where the kids are receiving cancer treat. Then they visited, you know, disadvantaged primary schools. So they did lots of, you know, like festivals and lots of non-formal education activities. So the main issue here is they just try to reflect what they learned through experiential learning process in this youth works. Okay, so here I would like to, you know, draw your attention to experiential learning cycle. Here, actually, there are 3 layers in their process. The first one is learning. Through all these games, simulations, you know, all these icebreakers, all these discussions, all these non-formal education programs. But then they do their praxis, they do their micro projects. But this is not the end. Actually, this is just the beginning, because we come together again with these youngsters and then we try to learn out of this praxis. For example, a group of youngsters, they go to a village school to repair the school building, make a library, etc. But after this praxis, when we do a debrief with the youngsters about talking about, you know, active participation of learners, their target group, etc. In their next project, so they decided to make a workshop with the kids before they make this renovation. So the colors of the walls or the types of the library or what kind of books they want. So they made these learners more actively participated to the process. So after this praxis, learning is an ongoing process and a developing process. So this is how we use experiential learning in our youth works, but definitely the praxis is a must. So it's not only we receive a training and we think about social problems, but also we should encourage youngsters to take initiative for these social problems. So thank you very much. So that's all that I plan to share with you about our NGO. Yeah, Fanale. Now I can give the floor to you back to proceed with the questions or maybe the panel and later on questions.
Thank you very much, Mustafa, for such an insightful presentation, really laying the foundation for us to understand and begin to think about experiential learning and how and its role in our lives and how we can position it in our lives and in the work that we do and in our personal lives and how we can embody that process and just really creating a greater understanding of experiential learning. I think I can definitely say with confidence that there are people in the room perhaps who've never grappled with the concept and now really have something to work with and something to think about and reflect on. Thank you so much for your presentation, and I can imagine there will be comments and questions which we will then look at during the discussion part of our session today. I just want to reiterate the point that please, throughout the conversations, please feel free to post any comments that you may have, post them on the chat, and then we will look at that during the discussion. You may also feel free to tweet on if you or post on your social media, just give people a glimpse of what they may be missing out on now, and just if you're on Twitter, do tweet and then just tag the Law Trust Chair. I will put their handle on the comment section shortly. So as we proceed, I am honored to introduce our panelists for today. If I may please ask Ms. Ruth Andrews and Mr. David Gabwa if they could please switch on their cameras if you can. Perfect. So I'll begin with Ms. Ruth Andrews. Ms. Ruth Andrews is the manager at the Co-Curriculum Office. She heads up the Co-Curriculum Office in the Center for Student Leadership, Experiential Learning and Citizenship here at Stellenbosch University. Her current role involves shaping the experiential learning domain as well as providing training opportunities for staff and students towards the praxis and practice of experiential education. Once again, Ms. Ruth Andrews, as I said, with Mr. Mustafa Erdogan, has an extensive biography, so I just wanted to give you a glimpse of just the work that she does. And so I'm going to then move on to Mr. David Gabwa, who also has an extensive and impressive bio. So I'm just going to highlight one or two things. He is a master's candidate in diplomatic studies at the University of Pretoria. He holds a bachelor's of political science degree in and an honors degree in international relations from the University of Pretoria. And as I said, he's currently a master's candidate in diplomatic studies at the University of Pretoria. He's currently representing South Africa on the African Youth for Transitional Justice platform, known as #AY4T, where he selected and where he was selected and trained by the Africa Union Department of Political Affairs, Peace and Security. So that's just a little bit about Mr. David Gabwa. So our panelists each have 10 minutes to make their contributions, and after that, we will then move on to the discussion. Ms. Ruth Andrews, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Fanele, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much to Mustafa Erdogan. Thank you for your contribution this afternoon and for giving us a really solid foundation to understand the work of experiential education and experiential learning and how that actually looks in practice as well as praxis. So I'm going to be glancing a little bit down at some notes that I've got. So if I do lose eye contact, it's what I'm looking at as the notes. My take this afternoon is a slightly different angle. I'm going to talk specifically to some of the voices that informed the experiential education environment, specifically through the angle of social justice. And then I'm going to try and pull that into our understanding of what that looks like for our environment within South Africa. So I'm going to begin by going a little bit further back in terms of theory than Kolb. Kolb drew his work from Dewey, and when it comes to social justice and experiential education, Paulo Freire is the name that everybody speaks to. So our thinking really looks at pulling from these individuals' understanding and what they contributed in the space when we begin to do the work of experiential learning in relation to social justice as pedagogy. So if we look at that, we are more concerned then about the preparation of individuals in order for them to participate in a democracy. So that is the foundation when one connects experiential learning and social justice together. It is in essence to develop citizens to participate in a democracy. And foundational to the thinking of these individuals was precisely that. The other connection is that when one looks at experiential learning and developing the capacity of people, one has to take that in relation to a political process. So learning in experiential domain with praxis and practice in relation to social justice always has political undertones. For us to be really mindful as we try to see how do we inculcate this within a community setting, particularly when we talk about empowerment and upliftment. These will always be pieces that will come to play. And then if one looks at seeing social justice at the fore of this, one sees communities and its members not as individuals that has to be led or taught, but they become whole human beings, specifically not just looking at a specific area of their learning and teaching, but as entire beings located within a social construct. So they're not devoid of the space that they are coming from, not devoid of their context, are always remembering that and always putting that into the forefront when one creates a learning environment and one constructs a learning opportunity. One always considers the context of the community as well as the individuals within that learning environment. And at the end point of that is always embedding and understanding that these individuals are active members within a community, and the intention out of social justice practice and praxis, linking it into the domain of experiential learning, is about transformation. And when one talks about transformation, that in itself lends us to understand that the process involves three areas specifically. The first one is the context. Context always precedes the learning or whatever the intervention is, or the upliftment or empowerment initiative is about. The context will always precede that. The other element we all know and familiar with, particularly in South Africa, is the structural impediments that either come to play with or against that experiential learning opportunity. And these constructs or structural implications in our society usually carry power and privilege, and they work together either to assist or to constrain the learning opportunity. And it's careful to note here that when one talks about experiential learning and experiential education, these are power-laden, power dynamic constructs. They're not devoid of hegemony. And hegemony simply means that when people create an understanding or a notion of how the world is, they, whether this is true or not, that becomes the embedded narrative. And often we find in societies where there are social injustices, hegemony comes to play, where those injustices are bedded down and they almost become the norm. So one believes that certain practices become normalized in certain environments in particular. Without going into any detail, I think we can think of many instances where many injustices in South Africa have been normalized at the incredible detriment to generations. And then the third and most important piece is the individual, the agent or the agency of that individual, and the self-identity or the identity of that individual, and how that is in relation with another. So these three pieces come to play when one talks about experiential learning, social justice, and within a community setting, specifically when one wants to bring in an intervention or a process of upliftment in an environment. And I think Mustafa laid it very carefully down for us when he illustrated to us that when one begins that journey, it's never about the individual walking into the environment and delivering the goods. It's about that environment, and it's about the individual that is going through or receiving or participating in that learning journey. Therefore, when one works with communities, it has to be community-centered, at the community's intent, at their pace, for their needs, addressing their specific context. And I think often when people with well-intentions go in and have unintentional consequences as a result of their efforts, is that they haven't considered the three factors that we mentioned earlier on: the context, the structural implications, and the person inside of all of that. And then I think I want to just perhaps bring it to draw this part to a close by just mentioning the work of Amartya Sen. We're all familiar perhaps with him now in relation to the recent Olympics, but he's not famous for getting the award for that, but more for his humanitarian work, for changing around the economic realities of those that are in dire, impoverished spaces. So Amartya Sen took the notion of human rights and he linked that to the understanding of capabilities. And if we talk about capabilities into the context of this talk this afternoon, when we talk about it, we're talking about what do we actually then take to the community in terms of empowering and uplifting that community. And what he had to say is one has to be really, really careful when you hold the issue of social justice and you hold the issue of empowerment, and you try to connect the two, that the one doesn't subsume the other and the one doesn't overpower the other. There is always going to be a tension. And the tension, he says, is around that learning component. Who decides what capabilities is needed? Who decides what is considered in that environment as the freedoms that that environment needs? And what are the appropriate, how are those appropriate capabilities or interventions selected, by whom and for what purpose? So what he is addressing is that the knowledge structure or the hegemony that comes with knowledge, and trying to pin that to the humanities or the humanitarian rights of that particular community that one is working with. So he cautions against just simply connecting these two thoughtlessly, having always to bear in mind that human rights is always the critical cornerstone, and what capabilities get connected there has to be through the lens of the needs of that specific community. Then just lastly, I do want to just mention a few considerations when working with social justice, community, and experiential learning. That experiential learning and experiential education does require whoever goes in to understand that context, and they themselves need to be trained in order to do that work, as with any other profession. Then, more importantly, often people see themselves as the heroes. They're going to rescue this community. They are doing amazing work. And yes, that is not to say amazing work doesn't happen, but also to remember there has to be a balance between what is being put forward, the interconnectedness, and how that knowledge is co-constructed. Then most importantly, the people leading the space or holding the space for learning, experiential learning that is happening, needs to honor the people in that space in the way that they prefer, in the way that they wish to be taught, and in the way they wish to be, taking ownership of their learning journey. And then most importantly, time, quality, and the intent of reflection. These are all very critical components to the work with experiential learning and social justice. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for your insightful contribution. It is truly appreciated, and looking forward to engaging with you further during the discussion part of our session. I would like to then hand over to Mr. David Gabwa. Your time begins now. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, and my sincere gratitude for the invitation to this platform, to Prof. Madonsela and your team, to finally our facilitator, to Mustafa and Ruth. I think it's been a really excellent contributions up until this point. So I'd like to begin by contextualizing a point that Ruth made very clear, the positionality from which I am approaching this. I am a former two-term SRC president at the University of Pretoria. I was the first African to have been elected as Prime Minister in the Commonwealth Youth Parliament, and I've served in the Gauteng Provincial Legislature as one of the longest serving members of the Gauteng Youth Sector Parliament. It was very much a youth-based perspective that I'm going to outline this with. So I'm going to speak about the benefits of experiential learning, how that impacts young people, as well as the communities that surround us. So to begin, I'd like to touch on my first experience with experiential learning, and that was at a program run by the South African Department of International Relations and Cooperation, DIRCO, and we had an experiential learning program about diplomacy, essentially. We learned about economic diplomacy, protocol training, foreign policy, public speaking, and lessons from South African diplomats. And I've done very many courses throughout my life. This was one of those that really stuck with me. And this is where I started to realize the importance of experiential learning. The first point I'd like to make is that a major benefit of experiential learning is that it has the potential to help young people and students make deep and lasting connections with whatever material or context that we are dealing with. When you set up learning situations and you can apply concepts and knowledge to real life problems and situations, like the ones that are experienced and encountered in professional settings, this creates a space where we can begin to see similar patterns in problems and begin to identify potential solutions. Then when we encounter such problems in future, we are well capacitated to address them because we draw from a rich bank of examples and knowledge, and we can use these to kind of build our responses, our solutions, and plot the way forward. Second really important benefit of experiential learning is that it has the power to support and facilitate motivation in learning. Motivation is the beginning of discipline, in my opinion. And the reason why this is important is because oftentimes we are in a space where we are motivated in the beginning. We want to get started. We want to go into the community. We want to make a change. We want to be impactful and impactful. Then one day turns to two, two turns to three, three turns to four. Next thing you know, a week has passed, a month has passed. Sometimes things can drag on for years. And this is where motivation begins to fall away. Now, when motivation falls away, it is discipline that will keep you moving forward. And that discipline is only founded when we start in a good frame of mind, when we are motivated and ready for the work that we are willing to do. We often hear the saying, as a person who does what I love to do, it does not feel like work. Now imagine if we had this mentality in our approach with our communities, with civil society, with matters of social justice, we would see a massive change. And that is one of the important aspects of experiential learning, is that it allows and serves as a motivating point and factor to move on in this particular aspect. One thing I want to touch on, and this I suppose would be the third point, and links back to Mustafa's presentation in the beginning, is that experiential learning creates the capacity for emotional learning. It allows us to develop our emotional intelligence. I'll give a quick example. When I was in the Gauteng Youth Parliament, we would go and we would pick up young people from all over the country. And we would engage on really topical issues pertaining to youth: data cost, unemployability, access to higher education. These were the issues we discussed. And we had a stop in Hammanskraal where we went to pick up some young people. And at the time, the water was so bad because the sewage plant was not being well taken care of. So when we entered the space, people were upset, and rightfully so, because when they opened their taps, the water tasted and smelled of sewage. Now, if you do not have emotional intelligence and you are looking to have an engagement in such a space, you misunderstand and misappropriate the frustration and anger that comes with operating in such a space, and that would inform the positionality of those with whom you are engaging. And what I witnessed in that instance was many moments of intransigence that simply derailed a lot of constructive engagements because we lacked the emotional intelligence to understand different perspectives, views, and thoughts. And this is an important part of experiential learning because it allows us to engage in experiences, to confront emotions that we otherwise might not have a chance or opportunity to be exposed to, and to apply practical solutions towards addressing them. The fourth part and benefit of experiential learning has to do with critical reflection. The process of experiential learning helps us to make meaningful, deep, and lasting connections with foundational knowledge that has been previously gained, and root that knowledge in new experiences that we are plotting forward. Without critical reflection, what would happen is the potential to reinforce negative stereotypes, to derive simple solutions to complex problems, to draw inaccurate solutions or generalizations based on limited information, to miss the most important learning experiences, or to develop a poor awareness from experiences that we are currently dealing with. Now, the reason why I choose to focus on the benefits of experiential learning is because we need to get to a point in society where we normalize ensuring that what we learn goes beyond what I pick up in a textbook, what I pick up in a classroom, what I fetch from a lecture, a pedagogical standpoint where you simply sit and absorb information instead of engaging with information. It is what we need as a society. I have a saying that I always like to emphasize, and that is that we have the capacity and we have the capability to loosen the shackles of mediocrity that have bound so many to complacency. And to move beyond the point of complacency, we need to learn from our experiences, to build upon that knowledge, and to grow. I like to say that we carry the voice of an entire generation for contemplation, great pontification, and that will take us to joyful jubilation. And we achieve that by ensuring that when we grow as a community, when we grow as a society, it does not happen in silos. We need to grow together through active participation. And that is one of the core tenets of experiential learning. I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to be redundant, as a lot of my points have been covered by our earlier speakers. But in closing, I will say this, that experiential learning is not so much an option, it is an absolute necessity for our society. And I'm grateful for platforms like this, because we need to bring these conversations to the forefront. And also in the forefront of these conversations, it is important that we bring in the future represented through the youth in our country.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you to both our panelists, David and Ruth, for your incredible contribution, building on the foundation that was laid by our keynote speaker, Mustafa. So as I have been promising that we will have a platform for discussion, we have come to that part of our session, and I just want to open up the floor for any comments, any questions. You may direct them to any of our panelists or our keynote speaker. So I'm just looking out for any virtual hands, any comments on the comment section. Did anything stand out for you? Do you need clarity on anything that was said? There's a lot that we need to reflect on and need to just sit with incredible contributions that were made. So I'm just going to give an opportunity now for us to have a conversation and to reflect. I saw here on the chat, Mustafa, you were thanking Ruth for emphasizing the context, context being very important. You said because we should be aware of the real life oppression which we aim to transform. And this is the context. A very important point that you have made there. Prof. Madansela, I see you have your hand up. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you to our colleagues, Mustafa, Erdogan, our colleague Ruth, and David. Those were fantastic contributions, enlightening and thought-provoking. I've recently taken an interest in neuroscience and making sense of what I had learned from spiritual education about how we see the world and how people do things the way they do them. For example, you would have thought that a child who was exposed to gender-based violence and ended up being homeless because his mom had to run away from his drunk dad who was beating her up and beating everyone up, never engage in domestic violence. But it happens the other way around. A lot of people who have been exposed to violence end up being violent themselves, which brings me to the question about trauma, including generational trauma. Do you think that experiential learning could be systematized into teaching not just children, but everyone in the pursuit of non-racism, non-sexism, and just generally inculcating egalitarian values and enabling them, though, to connect emotionally with what they already think they know about difference and deserving, and get them to connect with a new truth and new values about difference and diverse and what you deserve as a human being. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Matansela, for your question. I see Mustafa and David have their hands up. Mustafa, I'm going to go to you first. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Prof. Matansela, it's a very good question about using experiential learning for developing mutual understanding, increasing awareness about diversity, non-racism. Yes, actually, we are using experiential learning a lot, and we see the power of experiential learning methodology because in my presentation, we solve the cycle that we go clockwise. But also, we can take the experiential learning cycle. Actually, this is what we do. We also use it in a retrospective way. Because by this way, our learners understand today how I am experiencing the world, and how I am experiencing the world is very much related with my previous experiences and knowledge. So this is where the point that David mentioned about critical thinking. Because once we understand how our today's experiences, not only experiences, but how we reflect on these experiences and how we understanding the world is structured by previous unconscious learning, then we are ready to liberate from this oppression. That's why once a learner becomes an experiential learner, which means a conscious learner, and knows the cycle, has a metacognitive approach about her own learning process, then it is easier to talk about all these previous cultural, educational backgrounds which made us see the world as it is right now, and then deconstruct and reconstruct it together.
Thank you very much for your response, Mustafa. I'm going to give David an opportunity to contribute.
Right, I appreciate that, and thank you for the question as well, Prof. I'm loving Mustafa. I feel like we're on the same wavelength right about now, and this is something that's very beautiful. Right, so just to contextualize my response, President Ramaphosa introduced a new initiative called the President's Reading Circle, and I was invited to have a discussion there, and we discussed The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. Very interesting book. I think a lot of us might be familiar with it. But essentially, what Frantz Fanon outlines in the book is similar to what Mustafa just mentioned, and that's the cyclical nature of these issues. I started an initiative with the Hope Givers Foundation called the Boy Child Initiative. And essentially what we sought to do was address the cyclical nature of gender-based violence in South Africa. So I would frame gender-based violence as sort of kind of an umbrella term, and within it there are many different kinds of violence. There's structural violence, there's sexual harassment, but in it as well there's domestic violence. So statistically, as we're all aware in South Africa, the largest amount of victims of gender-based violence are women. So when we zero in specifically on domestic violence, it is young boys who suffer the most from domestic violence. And this contributes to the cycle of young boys who become perpetrators and negatively impact and influence society because, like Mustafa mentioned, they have not had the opportunity to experience anything that's different. So what we started to do was we targeted young boys in Alexandra, and we would have very difficult conversations. We'd speak about men are trash, we'd speak about toxic masculinity, we'd speak about the importance of no means no. And what I was grateful to see was that a lot of them went back into their communities and they started to teach a lot of the younger boys. And they were teaching from experience. So indirectly, we were engaging the youth in the area in experiential learning. So to answer Prof's question, I think, yes, experiential learning does have a massive contribution. But that contribution is only effective if I take that point and I link it back to what Ruth said about the importance of context. I remember when I showed up, I did not stand and give a lecture. I pulled out a pen and paper and I started rapping. And I just freestyled for like 30 minutes and they loved it and they were engaged. And then we spoke about what is happening within their societies. When we apply context to experiential learning to address the cyclical nature of these matters, I think that's the best way to address them. Thank you, Fanel.
Thank you very much, David, for your contribution. Ruth, I saw that you had your hand up. Do you want to perhaps contribute?
Thank you so much. And what a brilliant question, Prof. Thank you so much for the question. I'm going to respond from a slightly different angle. And in essence, when we look at identities, the social anthropologists and the social scientists, as well as social psychologists, will tell us different things. They all have a different viewpoint. But one that is very prevalent is the understanding that our identity is forged when we're young, and we are shaped through those experiences, the formative experiences. But the personal identity is the malleable one, and that's the one that when we engage with society, we take in new information, that it will not erase the past, but it will help us to make sense of the things of the past. That together with the social identity is where we take up roles and positions, or we form organizations, we hold some type of position in society. It could be a parent even, that's also a position, or it could be a more corporate type of position. And when one looks at how trying to address any issue in society, one has to be cognizant of the identity that comes to play in the individual, and at what point one can address and what is needed in that specific instance for that individual. So again, I think any form of intervention on racism and sexism has to be cognizant of what forged that self-identity, what created the issue in the first place, and then looking at where can we intervene. We can intervene at 2 points, the social one and then the personal one. The personal one is the part where people take in knowledge. And so to understand how does one create learning interventions and to draw on these understandings will be enormously helpful in trying to shift the tide of what's going on in society. And I think just to pull in a different viewpoint, and I think that is applied in many instances where people design specific interventions that is tailor-made for somebody that's struggling with any form of societal ill or addiction or anything of that nature, is to address some of those underlying factors that cannot shift, recognize they can't shift because they're in the self, and then to look at the pieces that can shift, and then to help the individual making sense of the pieces, and then how they address that in a social perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our panelists for your responses. I will give Prof, do you perhaps have a follow-up comment, or is there anyone else that would like to comment on what has just been said, or if they have any other questions? Now is an opportunity for you to speak. I'm looking at the chat room to see if there are any comments. So to our panelists, thank you so much for that contribution. And really, I think I see there's a comment that just came in. I was about to ask, I was about to just pose a question, but I will go to another question on the chat. Prof. Madonsela asking once again, what specific exercises would you recommend for teaching social justice? So what specific exercises would you recommend for teaching social justice? Would any of our panelists like to respond?
Right, I appreciate again, another excellent question, Prof. Right, so I think the best, especially since, we're discussing experiential learning, would be exercises pertaining to role playing. And these exercises would have to have a particular outcome, a desired outcome going into them. And the reason why I bring up this point is because I've done a lot of work with young people in two spaces. One of the spaces is young people in a lot of very rural areas and young people in very developed communities. I think we're all familiar with Model United Nations, which essentially, role-playing states within the UN. And in many institutions of higher learning, I believe at a second-year level, it forms part of the curriculum. And I would always notice, and myself have seen, that learning it, through role-playing, through acting out, through putting yourself in the space and in that situation has been one of the most beneficial approaches to teaching it. And the same can apply for social justice. We can create scenarios that apply. Again, I bring up context, as Ruth mentioned, that can apply to the context of the particular group or young people that we're dealing with. And that enables them to understand it better. And when we direct it towards a particular constructive and positive outcome, I think that would be the best. So essentially learning by doing, and I think role-playing is a good exercise that would bring that about.
Thank you very much, David. Ruth, over to you.
Thank you so much. We are at the university doing a module that's seeking to do precisely that. How do you develop and inculcate a way or a philosophy of social justice as part of one's being? And the way that we are doing this is foremostly to immerse the student in the understanding of what social justice is. They do a lot of reflexive work, reflexive versus reflection, where reflexive means they have to look at the condition. Reflection is post normally. Reflexive is you pull on your own understanding and your own experience, which ties into what Mustafa shared with us around the experiential learning circle. That reflection component is a core part. So we start off with a component of reflection and experience, but looking first and foremost at the student's own experience of a condition. So having them understand what that is in reality, and then moving from that and looking at how that really is unpacked in terms of the concepts that undergird or support that in the environment, And then foremost and lastly, then is taking that learning and reapplying it. That is one way we're doing it. It's following the actual Kolb's learning cycle. We're modeling it in the Shared Humanity module. But a very powerful thing happened in this module. In our sixth session, we had what we call an immersion. And during the immersion, we intentionally designed a process that involved students immersing themselves in their own identity within a space and place that they are located in, embedding themselves in the process of experiencing what is social justice for themselves. And that for us was just, the work took another level, from little engagement online, and this is all online, to suddenly people logging on that hadn't really been actively engaged in the module up to that point. So I think what we've learned through that experience is to teach social justice has to be an immersion. One cannot do it cognitively. One cannot do it with a student all on their own. One has to actually purposefully and intentionally have an immersion where they are immersed into a process that awakens their understanding of the reality of justice and injustice in its various forms with the world where they are connected to. So a direct dialectical, as they call it, connected into the actual experience that they are undergoing. Every session of this purposefully designed, every part of the purposefully designed session began with a simple statement that you stand and acknowledge the land that those before you have stood on. A simple little thing like that awoken the understanding that there were people before us on this land pre-colonial times, and positioning social justice with one sentence and then taking them through a very practical process. So we had a total of 12 practices, as we called it. Each of these practices dealt with the emotions, with the five senses, and then with how they pulled all of that together into their own experiences, and then the reflexivity, what connected this to their past experience, to where they are presently, and what would it mean for them going forward. So the simple answer is, it has to be an immersion. You have to put the learner, the student, into that space of experience, because that's when the true awakening happens. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Mustafa, over to you.
Yeah, very shortly, Fanale. Actually, one contribution about what David said about these role plays. I'm also a trainer in European Union youth programs. So for our participants, maybe these tools would be beneficiary. So this webpage is the European Commission's webpage, where you can find several training kits. So inside there are lots of games, like simulations, role plays. Specifically, I would like to draw our participants' attention to the training kit about social inclusion and also intercultural learning. So there are really powerful tools. Also, there is this web page, Salto Youth. There is a search engine where you can search any game, any role play related with different themes. But lastly, I would like to say something related with what Ruth said about, just talking about openly what is social justice for you. So this is about dialogue. I think all these games, role plays are very powerful tools to provide experience, but also let's remember a true dialogue in a circle of equals is also very strong experience. So dialogue itself is also very good experience. So also we should always remember that dialogue is also an experience, not also a way of reflection after experience, but being inside a dialogue is a deep experience.
Thank you very much to our speakers for your responses, and once again to Prof. Madonsela for such an insightful and thought-provoking question. We do have a little bit of time for one more question that I'm going to either pose to anyone in the room if they have a comment or a question. If not, I will then proceed and just ask a question just to. So I would just like to pose this question. It's actually twofold to our panelists. And I ask this question with the understanding that all three of you really work and you operate in different spaces. In the context of David and Ruth, you're both here in South Africa, but you are in different spaces within the country. And of course, Mustafa in Turkey and in working there. So I'm really interested to understand the types of challenges. What are the challenges and some of the barriers in your experience when you that have really are. So what are these barriers or challenges that you experience in your work and in the work of experiential learning within our specific communities? And perhaps what are some of the ways that you have tried to circumvent and overcome these challenges, considering looking at the reality and the context of the communities that you work in? What are these challenges? What are these barriers? And what measures have you put in place, if any, to begin to address them? These could be social challenges, these could be institutional challenges, and I mean the list is endless. So yes, I'm gonna ask you, Mustafa, if you can just address that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking this, Panele, because the job that we are doing is not always pink. So we have, experiential learning is very powerful, but of course there are lots of challenges implementing this. Very shortly, just talk about one challenge, which I also found a way how to overcome. Actually, I'm not facing with challenges when I'm working with young people. So really, if you set up this true dialogue circle and start learning together, they are open, they are really receptive, and this is very beautiful. You are learning a lot from each other. But when it comes to work with educators, I'm not talking about everyone, but also some educators. I mean, not only from formal education field, but also from non-formal education field. There are some structures, some walls that you can't pass, let's say, because it is hard to accept that to compare what they do with the experiential learning is not easy to accept and digest for them many times. And this was a challenge. And I noticed that actually I have to change my attitude. I have to change my approach, because when I look to any educator, even not implementing experiential learning, or let's say following this banking model of education, which Paulo Freire criticizes, only passing information, etc. So I started to mention about, hey, you are also doing experiential learning, because experiential learning is not only learning by doing, it's learning by feeling, reflecting, thinking, and doing. So it has 4 dimensions. And actually, you do good about this thinking part, and you do good about this, let's say, reflecting part, or maybe acting part. But what about, covering the other dimensions of experiential learning? By this way, I observed that I could set up this communication bridge easier with these educators, and this was really a big challenge for me for many years. But now things are easier, I must say.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. Any of other panelists that would like to address this question? Yes, Ruth, over to you, and then I'm going to go to David. Oh, David, you can go ahead. Thank you. It's whichever one switches on their camera first. Okay, Ruth. Yeah, now it's David. Finally, yes, David, you may go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. Sorry for the confusion there. Right, 2 things in terms of challenges experienced. First is resources. I think resource constraints are always amongst the biggest impediments to the success of any endeavor. And secondly would be access. So when I speak of resource impediments, I'll give 2 examples. Or I'll give one example. During my time as president of the Src, this was in the very beginning of the pandemic. Obviously, we had students spread across all over the country, and great difficulties experienced. What we did in this instance was we got all of our student formations together, and we started an Src Solidarity Fund. We partnered up with Checkers and ShopRite, and we organized vouchers to send the voucher numbers to students so that you could get an SMS, you go to your local supermarket, and you're able to get groceries to sustain you until your NSFAS kicks in, or until the situation at home has stabilized a bit more. Now, in that instance, the way we overcame that problem was by pulling together and simply stretching the what I call little resources that we had at the time in relation to the notion of access. As I mentioned in the youth parliament, one of the biggest impediments that many young people faced was not being able to be part of the conversation. When I was invited to come back to the youth parliament, I gave a condition, and the condition was, I want you to give me a budget, and I want to use this budget purely for transportation. So I would organize quantums, and we'd go to different areas in Gauteng. We pick young people up, put them in the conversation, and then drop them off afterwards. And what I saw in these two scenarios is that when we can essentially start with what we have, that is the best way to overcome resource constraints. We may not completely solve the problem, but we can take a step forward. And a step is a step in the right direction, so long as it is a step taken forward. And I think that's the best way to overcome any challenges, and the same applies to experiential learning.
Thank you very much, David. Ruth, over to you.
Thank you so much, Vanelli. I think I had mentioned a couple at the end of the time I had earlier on. The one is the understanding of what experiential learning is and what experiential education is in the environment. It is very misunderstood in our South African context. And because of that, there's various interpretations of what makes up experiential learning and experiential education. It is also not welcomed against the core academic discourse in our institutions, sadly so. So primary and preference is the conceptual understanding of learning, and neglected is the power of experiential learning. Sadly to say, that is the case, yet we know that people primarily change through their experience. And if we start with that experience, the other part will be much easier. And then I think the issue on resources was touched on, training of individuals to understand how to work with various tools, and then that will allow for us to always put the learner or the community at the center of what we're doing. Otherwise, it is the motivation is all skewed. So authenticity and motivation, those values has to be really crystal clear. One has to go in with honor and with a pure intent, and not with ego that you're going to rescue people and you're saving a set of a community or however. The journey is one that what you at the onset, you've got to say, I'm in this for the long haul. I'm walking this journey with you till the end. And I think that's part of experiential learning. One connects it to pedagogy, come alongside, and you actually do not actually leave the learner or the community. You work with that community and you stay connected to it. And there's many, many South African examples of where that worked out incredibly, incredibly powerfully, and whole communities were changed as a result of that approach. So thank you for a very good question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth and David and Mustafa. We have come to the end of our discussion for today. Thank you to Prof. Matanzela for the amazing questions that you posed, to everyone that has just been part of the discussion. Really appreciate it. Before I hand over to Prof. Matanzela to do our vote of thanks, I just want to say thank you once again to our speakers for today, really laying the foundation for us beginning understanding what experiential learning is, what it entails, what it looks like, particularly to unpack what it looks like in our own current context. And so just looking at understanding that context is very important, understanding that experiential learning is about the people that you're working with, and so it's human-centered, and so you need to understand the context, you need to understand the people that you're working with, and you need to understand the structure within and the environment within you operate. Looking at some, we unpacked some of the benefits of experiential learning, stating that it really helps with things like emotional intelligence, linking it to understanding the space and understanding people's different viewpoints. We looked at some of the challenges that our speakers unpacked, some of the challenges they unpack in this incredible work. We had a question around whether experiential learning could be ideal for advancing non-sexism and non-racism, and our speakers really unpacked that and trying to position experiential learning as a tool to really begin that process of learning in the advancement of social justice. And then we looked at specific exercises that our speakers would recommend. There's a question around that for teaching social justice. And once again, our speakers really delivered in providing, their viewpoints and the work also that they're doing in their respective spaces. Truly an incredible afternoon of contributions. And so I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to facilitate this incredible panel. It was truly an honor. And before we once again hand over to Prof. Matansela, I would like to ask if our speakers could switch on their cameras. If any our speakers, I'm going to start with our speakers first. If our speakers could switch on their cameras, and I'm going to ask Emil, or Diane, or any of the team members, or any of the ambassadors in the room, or anyone else for that matter, actually, to just take a photo. Good. I'd like to think there are a few photos. Then I'd like to ask everyone, if you can switch on your camera, please join us as we take a group photo. Seconds if you are willing to switch on your camera. Let's see the cameras are opening. Anyone else? Yes. It's good to see. I'm going to give a few more seconds. Anyone else that would like to join? Perfect. Thank you so much. I will then hand over to Prof. Matansela to do the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Fanele Sibonge Ndebele, for an amazing moderation of the panel on experiential learning and its potential for advancing social justice. I would also like to thank, of course, our amazing speakers that have shown the light on this underexplored subject. We learn through experiential learning generally. And that was what the example that was provided for us. That was what the example that was provided for us, Edgar, showed with the bicycle example. So we do learn through some kind of experiencing, and we learn most from those things that engage all of our senses. What we see, what we hear, how we feel about things. And all of our panelists have made it clear that social justice requires transformative learning and teaching or education, and that experiential learning is most ideal for this kind of teaching. So we're very thankful to our speakers in this order. Fanele Tebele, who was our moderator. David Gabwa, who is our fantastic young panelist. And of course, our own expert on experiential learning here at the University of Stellenbosch, Dr. Ruth Andrews, and who was equally amazing, and of course our keynote speaker, Mr. Mustafa Erdogan from the Experiential Learning Center in Turkey. As a social justice chair, we have found that experiential learning turns around even the most difficult of hearts. And then one example that I learned was from Harvard, where a teacher said to us, to get people to understand social justice, she immerses them, as Dr. Ruth Andrews suggested. And an 8-year-old was complaining about how contracts were going to Latinos, Black people, women, and people with disabilities, and that her father had complained about how this is undermining his own experiences of equal opportunities. And then the teacher got these 8-year-olds to be divided into 2 teams, a team that was going to wear pink t-shirts and one that was going to wear blue t-shirts. And the following day, she got the blue t-shirts to run as fast as they could at the blow of the first whistle, and said the pink team could only enter the race at the blow of the second whistle. And when it was time for the pinks to join, the little ones cried, saying this was unfair and the teacher was not going to budge, and said they could run. And of course they ran, and in the process, the fastest, even the fastest of the pinks, could only catch up with the slowest of the blues. And in real life, you can imagine that somebody like Caster Semenya or Wade Van Niekerk could catch up with the fastest, with the slowest of the blues if this was happening here. But ultimately, the pattern was the same. The pinks were always at the back. And this was the way the teacher wanted the little ones to experience the sadness of being left behind through a cruel act of discrimination and the challenge of remedying that injustice if you don't reset the game. And we did the same recently when we were teaching educators on social justice. We said one team was going to be the blue team and one was going to be the pink team, and playing a game of Monopoly this time. And I'm not going to say how it all works. All I just remember was that throughout our learning process, days after this happened, the pink team still felt that the blue team had a sense of entitlement, which means there was some kind of engagement at emotional level. And of course, the moment was transformative. And thank you to the colleagues. I will be continuously reaching out to you, all of you that have spoken on this panel, to learn from you examples of exercises or models that can be used for transformative learning in order to entrench a social justice mindset throughout society. At the level of justice, we're collaborating with Germans on serious gaming, which Dr. Mustafa told us about gaming as one way, again, of experiential learning. And we're getting into serious gaming to teach policymakers on social justice through designing something that is called the Social Justice Impact Assessment Matrix, translated into a game provisionally called the Social Justice Explorer. Thank you, dear colleague, and thank you to the young people that came up with this topic. And I think it was funnily, but in terms of sourcing the speakers and organizing this event today, we are grateful to our colleague and who's leaving us at this stage. And we are pretty sad about that, Emil Fekel. Emil, we're so grateful, but we hope you continue to join the Social Justice Café and other events of the Social Justice Unit. And thank you to everyone. May you all continue to be blessed and stay safe.